Hey friends, Snoopy here. I'm starting a new series on the leader and lore cards and arcs. This series, we're going to go over each of these leader cards and the guild cards and lore cards that I think go really well with them. The goal of this series is to be brief and concise rather than comprehensive. So, the goal of these videos is to be 10 minutes or less. This video is just going to serve as an introduction and overview of just what the leader and lore cards and arcs are. So we're going to cover the what, the why, the who, and the how of these leader and lore cards. As always, if you like what you see, give a like. If you want to see the rest of these videos, give a subscribe as well. Thanks. So, what are the leader and lore cards and arcs? The leader cards are permanent abilities for your player or faction. So, if you look at them, they're going to have a setup at the bottom, two resources which are going to be unique, as well as a positive trait and a negative trait. Some leaders have two positive traits, but generally it's going to be one positive and one negative. For example, the rebel leader here. He is committed, so in battle, you collect 2 extra dice. However, the rebel is also disorganized, and so he cannot move more than 2 ships at a time. And on the bottom, you can see the rebel starts with a material and a weapons resource. And in the A planet, where most leaders would start with the city and 3 ships, they start with 1 starport and 4 ships. And in the B, they only start with no buildings, but get 4 ships instead. And so these leaders are going to give a lot more asymmetry than the base game. Similarly, the lore cards are going to be an option as well. The lore cards are going to give just one ability and act very similar to guild cards. However, they have no icon and they have no key, so they cannot be stolen by your opponents. And they also generally cannot be discarded, with a few exceptions. And so these lore cards can give one ability or 2 abilities, and sometimes they have a passive effect. And so the other aspect of the leader and lore cards is that these cards are drafted. And so instead of just getting a couple at random, you're going to have them dealt out face up, and you're going to take turns picking one leader and one or more lore cards depending on how you want to set up the draft. That is the what of leaders and lore. There are 2 whys that we need to address with talking about leaders and lore. The first why is, why are leader and lore cards in the base game? And then the second why we need to answer is, why are they hidden in the back of the rulebook with a warning to not use these cards until after your first playthrough of the base game? The first why is going to be because the leader and lore cards add a lot more theme, a lot more asymmetry, and a lot more just fun to the base game. And so instead of just playing a game where you just have a random setup at the beginning and then go from there, you're going to have some cool abilities and effects right from the get-go that you had a hand in choosing through the draft. And so these cards end up allowing you to make your own faction from scratch just by drafting the cards that were available to you. And so the reason I think this is included in the base game is because it gives a great taste and picture of what the campaign expansion is like. Because the campaign expansion also gives you a start with a fate and unique abilities and objectives. And while the objective doesn't change with the leaders and lore cards, the abilities do. And that's what makes the leader and lore cards so much fun. That leads to the second question of why should you wait to use these awesome cards? I think the reason is that the setup in the rule book on page 20 is a draft. And as many draft games go, the player who knows the most generally has the most advantage. Drafts can be featured in games as simple as Sushi Go to more complex games like Blood Rage. Um, but I would say with the draft in Arcs is more similar to a trading card game draft. So something like Magic the Gathering. Imagine playing Magic the Gathering your first or second time, and your friend puts you in a draft. That is often what you could be putting some of your play group through if you're throwing them in after playing Arcs a whole bunch and know all about these lore cards and all about the leader cards, and ask your play group to draft some of these crazy powerful cards. They may get some rulings wrong. They may misunderstand some concepts. They may not completely ignore what these cards do. And so, because of that, and the fear of just not having a good time, I think that is why you should wait at least one turn. Many times it takes players 2 to 3 hands in Arcs to really get a grip on its action system and the trick taking nature of the action cards. And these leaders and these lore cards generally do not help with that learning process. That is the why behind the leader and lore cards. The next question is the who. Who are these leader and lore cards for? Well, I think the first answer to this is that these cards are for people who love the base game and want a more enjoyable experience. These cards make the base game much more complex, strategic, and just thematic in so many ways. I highly recommend using leader and lore cards after your first game and basically just always playing with them. Another group of people I think who would like leaders and lore cards would be people with experience with asymmetrical games. If you and your group have a lot of experience with asymmetric games, you may feel that like the symmetric nature of the base game of Arcs may not be for you. And leaders and lore cards are probably the thing you're looking for and that you were hoping for when you bought Arcs. And so if that's you, you may want to consider just jumping in just to leaders and lore right from the bat. Knowing that yes, you may get some things wrong, yes, you may make some mistakes in the draft or understanding some card mechanics, but you just want to start with the asymmetric nature because that's what you and your group are already used to. Another group of people who may want to just jump into leaders and lore cards are people who want to get into the campaign expansion as soon as possible. And just as with the leader and lore cards, if you were to go to the rulebook for the campaign expansion, it does also has a warning saying to not use that expansion until you've played at least one game first. And so I think if you are wanting to do just the base game, one option is to consider using leaders and lore just to help your group understand what Arcs is about. Arcs is an asymmetric game. Arcs is about having unique abilities that only you have and can't really be taken away. That is what the campaign is about and the story building aspect of that. And Leaders and Lore is a great way to introduce a new group to that. So that's the who. There's plenty of other groups of people who may be interested in the Leader and Lore cards, but I think that is the three main groups I think of people who already like the base game, people who already like asymmetric games, or people who want to get into the campaign as soon as possible. The how of leader and lore cards. With leader and lore cards, you're going to take a few of them. So in the base game, you have 8. There is an expansion pack that has 8 more, for 16 total. But in a 3-player game, you would just have 4 options. So the number of players plus 1. And then you would have just the same amount of lore cards. As an option, you may have additional lore cards. The main benefit to this is it makes the game much more wild and expressive. And so you would just add another lore card per player. So in a 3-player game, we would have 7 lore cards if we wanted to use 2 lore cards per player, and then 1 leader each. And so in our game, the way I've set up here, red player has the initiative, and so the blue player would pick first, and then yellow would pick, and then red would pick, and then blue would pick a second time, red would pick, yellow would pick again, and then red would pick their second pick. And so it goes counterclockwise, starting with the player to the right of the initiative marker. And so blue would have first pick, and so they could be free to pick either a leader card or a lore card. So blue could pick fuel drinker, and they would place it there. And then yellow would get to pick, and yellow could either pick a leader or a lore card. And so since blue picked a leader card, we know that blue can't pick again, so yellow may choose to get first pick of the lore cards. So yellow may pick the smear plating card. And now red gets to pick. So red can pick a lore card or a leader card. If they pick a leader card, then that's getting a yellow just a choice between the last two. If they pick a lore card, then that gives blue a limited option. So that covers the what, the why, the who, and the how of leader and lore cards and arcs. I hope this was helpful. The next several more of these videos are going to be just one-off videos on a particular leader. We will see just what cards go well with them, just in the abstract, and thinking through when to draft them and what are some advantages and disadvantages that each leader may provide. I hope to see you next time. Thanks.